The sound was a crack of lightning in a small room. Not loud, not explosive, just sharp, absolute. It sliced cleanly through the quiet evening hum of the cafe. Through the hiss of the espresso machine, the delicate clink of ceramic cups touching saucers, and the low murmur of half-finished conversations floating between tables. For a single frozen moment, the universe inside that cafe became only that sound, and the sting blooming across Anika Rao's left cheek. The slap echoed against the wooden walls and worn floorboards of the Daily Grind, a small neighborhood cafe that smelled permanently of roasted coffee beans and warm pastries. The sound lingered longer than it should have, hanging in the air like a cracked bell that refused to stop ringing. Then came silence, not the peaceful kind, the kind that follows violence. Anika's head had snapped sideways with the force of the strike. A few loose strands of her dark hair slipped from the tight bun at the back of her head, falling against her cheek. Her skin burned. Humiliation tasted metallic in her mouth, like copper. Her eyes struggled to focus as the room slowly returned to shape around her. The first thing she saw was the man who had hit her, Rex. He stood in front of her with the smug satisfaction of someone who believed the world belonged to him. He was a mountain of muscle and tattoos, thick arms covered in ink, a shaved head, a jaw that looked permanently clenched in irritation, and eyes full of casual cruelty. Behind him stood three men who looked exactly like the kind of friends Rex would keep, loud, arrogant, and eager to laugh when someone else was suffering. They snickered. One of them even clapped slowly. "Damn," another muttered. "She should have apologized." The cafe remained frozen. No one moved. No one spoke. People watched the way people always watch violence in public, with horrified fascination and a quiet relief that they were not the ones standing in its center. Anika did not cry. That was the first thing she noticed about herself. The tears that should have come didn't. Instead, there was only a cold clarity settling into her mind. He will not break me. The girl who carried too much. Anika Rao was 22 years old. Most people her age were still figuring out their lives. She didn't have that luxury. Her days were measured in exhaustion. Morning classes at the community college. Afternoon shifts tutoring high school students in math. Evenings at the Daily Grind, where she worked as a waitress until closing. 3 jobs. One goal. Her younger brother David. David was 19 and brilliant. A quiet engineering student with dreams far bigger than the tiny apartment they shared. Every dollar Anika earned went somewhere important. Tuition, rent, groceries, textbooks. She lived her life like a fortress under siege. Every expense planned, every hour scheduled, every ounce of dignity guarded carefully. Her uniform at the cafe reflected that discipline. A simple white server's dress, a deep crimson apron tied around her waist. The apron smelled faintly of coffee grounds, steamed milk, and lemon polish from the tables she wiped 100 times each night. To customers, she was just a waitress. To David, she was a reason his future still existed. And to herself, she was survival. The man in the corner. In the far corner of the cafe sat a man who had not touched his tea in over an hour. His name was Gene. He had been sitting there quietly, watching the room. Most people never noticed him. That was intentional. He dressed simply. A perfectly tailored dark suit, crisp but understated. His posture was relaxed, but his stillness carried a quiet authority. The cup in front of him held oolong tea that had long since gone cold. Gene hadn't come to the cafe for tea. He had come to observe. He came here 3 nights a week. Always the same table. Always the same drink. Always silent. From this quiet seat, he watched the city breathe. He mapped power the way some men map streets. He noticed who owed money, who feared whom, who carried themselves like predators, and who survived by staying invisible. Anika had caught his attention weeks ago, not because she was loud, but because she wasn't. She moved through the cafe with calm efficiency, polite but distant, friendly but guarded. She carried exhaustion in the lines around her eyes. Yet there was something else there too. Pride, quiet strength. Gene had seen thousands of people in his life. Most fell into predictable roles. Predators, prey, or pieces on a board. Anika was none of those. She endured, and that interested him. When predators enter a room, Jean felt the shift in atmosphere before Rex even spoke. When Rex and his friends walked into the cafe earlier that evening, the air had thickened. Predators did that. They carried chaos with them. Rex slammed into a chair at the center table, spreading himself out like he owned the place. His friends followed. Their voices were loud, their laughter louder. They snapped their fingers for service. Jean watched quietly, and he watched Anika handle them. She moved with practiced professionalism, a polite smile, short answers, quick exits. She gave them nothing. But men like Rex didn't want politeness. They wanted submission. They wanted to break something. The manufactured offense. The incident began exactly the way such incidents always begin, with a lie. Rex had been waving his arms while telling a crude story to his friends. His elbow struck his own latte. The cup tipped. Brown liquid spilled across the table and dripped onto the floor. Rex stared at the mess for a moment. Then he turned slowly toward Anika. "Look what you made me do." His voice carried across the room. The cafe went quiet. Anika approached calmly with a cloth. "I'll clean that up for you." Her voice was steady, professional, reasonable, the wrong response. Rex stood up. His chair scraped loudly across the floor. He towered over her. "You bumped my arm," he growled. "I saw you." Anika didn't move. She simply replied, "Sir, I was across the room." The truth angered him. "Now you're going to apologize," he said. "And this coffee?" He gestured at the spilled drink. "It's on the house." Behind him, his friends leaned forward like spectators, waiting for entertainment. Anika straightened slightly. It was a small movement, but it was a declaration. "I'm happy to bring you another coffee," she said, "but I have nothing to apologize for." The room held its breath. Rex's expression hardened. He stepped closer. Too close. "Apologize." Anika lifted her chin. "No." And that was when Rex slapped her. The man who stood up before the shock gas from nearby tables could fully escape. Jean moved. He did not rush. He simply stood, slowly, deliberately, like the tide changing direction. He placed a few bills beside his untouched tea, enough to pay, and a generous tip. Order, even in chaos. Then he walked toward Rex, silent, controlled. Within seconds, he was standing behind him. Jean spoke quietly. "That was a mistake." Rex spun around. "Who the hell are you?" Jean looked at him calmly. "I'm the man telling you to leave." Rex laughed. "You serious?" But then he looked into Jean's eyes, and the laughter died, because there was nothing inside those eyes. No anger, no fear, just certainty. Cold, absolute certainty. Jean stepped slightly to the side, placing himself between Rex and Anika. A line drawn. Rex puffed his chest. "Or what?" Jean spoke calmly. "This is not a negotiation. You will walk out that door. You will not look back. And you will never come here again." The cafe was silent. Jean's voice had never risen. Yet somehow it filled the entire room. Rex felt something unfamiliar creeping into his chest. Fear, because bullies understand power better than anyone. And Rex suddenly realized he was not the biggest predator in the room. Rex swallowed. Then he backed away. His friends followed. Within seconds they were gone. The bell above the cafe door chimed mockingly as they fled into the night, and the cafe finally exhaled. Anika touched her cheek, still burning. Her eyes turned to Jean. "Thank you," she whispered. Jean studied her quietly. "Are you injured?" "No." He nodded once. "He will not bother you again." Then he wrote a phone number on a napkin. "If that proves untrue," he said calmly, "call me." And he walked out of the cafe. Anika stared at the napkin in her hand. She didn't know it yet, but that small square of paper was about to change her life forever, because somewhere else in the city, a man named Marcus Thorne had just learned that one of his men had been humiliated, and Marcus believed in correcting imbalances. Publicly, violently. The city forgot the slap. Cities always did. Violence in public spaces became background noise after a few days. Another ugly moment swallowed by the endless motion of traffic lights, office deadlines, and late-night takeout orders. But Anika didn't forget. Some memories didn't fade. They settled under your skin like tiny splinters. Every time she walked past the same table in the cafe, she remembered the sound, the crack, the silence, and the man who had stepped out of the shadows to stop it. Gene. His name still felt strange in her mind. She had replayed that moment in her thoughts dozens of times over the following week. The quiet authority in his voice, the calm certainty in his eyes, and the napkin. The napkin still sat in her wallet, folded neatly between two old receipts. A phone number written in precise handwriting. She had considered throwing it away more than once, but every time she opened her wallet and saw it, something inside her hesitated, because deep down, she knew something important. Men like Gene did not appear in ordinary lives by accident. The fortress returns. Life returned to its familiar rhythm, or at least it tried to. Anika woke before sunrise most mornings. Her alarm rang at 5. She showered quickly, dressed in jeans and a simple sweater, and hurried across town to the community college. Morning classes, afternoon tutoring, evening shift at the daily grind. Sometimes she worked 14 hours straight. The exhaustion had become normal. Her brother David noticed it, though. One night, while she was cooking pasta in their tiny apartment kitchen, he leaned against the counter watching her. "You look tired," he said. Anika laughed softly. "I always look tired." "That's not funny. It's also not new." David ran a hand through his messy hair. "You don't have to do everything yourself, you know." She turned toward him. "Yes, I do." He opened his mouth to argue, then stopped, because they both knew the truth. Their parents had died in a car accident 3 years earlier. Since then, it had been just the two of them. Anika had stepped into the role of provider without hesitation. Rent, food, school, everything. David carried guilt about it constantly, but Anika refused to let him sacrifice his future. "You just focus on engineering," she said gently. "That's your job." "And yours." She shrugged, keeping the lights on. Meanwhile, across the city, in a dimly lit back room behind a waterfront bar, Rex stood nervously in front of a steel desk. Marcus Thorne sat behind it. Marcus was the opposite of Rex in every possible way. Where Rex was loud, Marcus was quiet. Where Rex was impulsive, Marcus was patient. Where Rex relied on brute force, Marcus relied on calculation. He was a thin man in his early 40s with sharp features and carefully combed hair. A pair of expensive glasses rested on the bridge of his nose. In his hands, he held a soft cloth. He was cleaning those glasses meticulously. Rex had been talking for 5 minutes straight. "And then this guy just steps like he owns the place." Rex finished angrily. "Some suit. Nobody special." Marcus did not look up. He continued polishing one lens. "You allowed a stranger to remove you from your own establishment." "It wasn't like that." Marcus finally looked up. His gaze was calm. "Cold. You were humiliated in public." Rex swallowed. The room had gone quiet. Marcus placed the glasses on his face again. "And the reason?" Rex shifted. "A waitress." Marcus leaned back in his chair. "A waitress." He said it softly, but there was something dangerous in the way the words hung in the air. "You see my problem," Marcus continued calmly. "An unknown individual interfered in my territory." Rex nodded quickly. "Exactly." Marcus shook his head slightly. "No, you misunderstand." He tapped the desk gently. "The man is not the problem." Rex frowned. "He's not." Marcus smiled faintly. "No, the waitress is." The leverage point. Marcus stood and walked to a window overlooking the harbor. Cargo ships moved slowly in the dark water. Dock cranes loomed like steel skeletons against the skyline. "Power," Marcus said quietly, "is about leverage." He turned back toward Rex. The man intervened because he cared about something. Rex's confusion deepened. "The girl?" Marcus nodded. "Precisely." He walked back to the desk. "Find out everything about her." Rex blinked. "Everything." Marcus smiled thinly. "Everything. Family. Friends. Where she lives. Where she works. Where she sleeps." He sat down again. "And then we will correct the imbalance." The first sign. 3 days later, Anika noticed a car. It was a black sedan, parked across the street from her apartment building. At first, she assumed it belonged to a neighbor, but the next morning it was still there. And the next night, same spot, same tinted windows, same silent presence. Something about it made the back of her neck itch. Still, she ignored it, because when your life is already overflowing with responsibilities, paranoia feels like a luxury. The phone call. The call came 2 nights later. Anika had just finished washing dishes. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter. David's name appeared on the screen. She smiled and answered, "Hey, genius." But David's voice sounded strange, tight, forced. Anika listened carefully. Her stomach tightened instantly. "What's wrong?" "I'm with some guys." Her heart stopped. "They said they're friends of yours." Anika felt the room tilt slightly. "What?" "They said you owe their boss money." The dishcloth slipped from her hand. "David, they want to meet you." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Where are you?" He hesitated, then said the words that turned her blood to ice. "The old cannery by the docks." Her chest tightened painfully. "David, they said come alone." Silence. "And don't call the police." The line went dead. Panic. The silence in the apartment was crushing. Anika stared at the phone in her hand. Her thoughts raced wildly. David, kidnapped, because of her, because of that night in the cafe. Her legs felt weak. She sank into a chair. Think. She couldn't go alone. But she couldn't call the police either. If Marcus was serious, they might hurt David. Her eyes drifted slowly toward her purse and the wallet inside it. Her hands trembled as she opened it. The folded napkin slid out. Jean's number. A solution. That's what he had called it. She stared at the number for several seconds. Then she dialed. The man who answered. The phone rang twice. Then someone picked up. No greeting. Just silence. Waiting. Anika swallowed. "You gave me your number." Her voice shook. "In the cafe?" A pause. Then Jean spoke. "I remember." His voice was exactly the same as before. Calm. Steady. Like a stone in a river. "What has happened?" And suddenly the tears came. She told him everything. The car. The threats. David. The cannery. She expected questions. Doubt. But Jean responded immediately. "Where are you right now?" "My apartment." "Lock the door." She stood and locked it instantly. "Do not leave. Do not answer unknown numbers. Text me the cannery address. Wait for my call." "But my brother," "They will not harm him." His certainty was terrifying. He is leverage. As long as they expect you to come, he is safe. She wiped her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Jean answered calmly. "I will solve the problem." The line went dead. The man behind the mask. Across the city, Jean stood inside a sleek high-tech office. Gone was the quiet tea drinker from the cafe. In his place stood something else entirely. A commander. Screens covered the walls. Maps, data, surveillance feeds. A man named Min stood nearby. Jean's top lieutenant. "Marcus Thorne," Min said while typing rapidly. "Controls dock distribution networks." Jean studied the digital map. "Ambitious," Min added, "but sloppy." Jean nodded. "He used civilians." Min glanced at him. "That violates a code." Jean's voice hardened. "Yes." Min looked toward the screen showing the cannery. "Should we warn him?" Jean shook his head. "No." A quiet silence filled the room. Then Jean spoke again. "Prepare the team." Silent entry. "Non-lethal takedowns." Min nodded. "And the boy?" Jean's expression sharpened. "Primary objective. Extract him safely." Min turned toward the door. Jean added one final instruction. "And Marcus?" "Yes." Jean's eyes turned cold. "Make sure he's still standing." "I want him listening." The cannery. The old cannery stood abandoned at the edge of the docks. Rust streaked down its metal walls. Broken windows rattled in the wind. Inside, Marcus waited. David sat tied to a chair in the center of the room. His face was pale but determined. Rex paced nearby nervously. "You sure she's coming?" Marcus checked his watch. "Yes." "How do you know?" Marcus smiled. Because she loves her brother. Rex shifted uneasily. Minutes passed. Then, a noise. A dull thud from outside. Rex frowned. What was that? Another thud. Marcus looked toward the door. Something felt wrong. Suddenly one of the lookout guards outside screamed. Then silence. Marcus stood slowly. Interesting. The lights flickered slightly. Rex reached for his gun, and then the shadows in the room moved. The shadows moved. At first, Rex thought it was just his imagination. The cannery was an old building, full of creaking metal beams and shifting shadows cast by the hanging fluorescent lights. But this was different. The darkness along the far wall detached itself. 3 shapes separated from the blackness. They moved with terrifying precision. Silent, efficient, professional. Rex's brain struggled to process what he was seeing. Men, dressed in black. Faces partially covered. Moving like ghosts. One of Marcus's guards stepped forward, confused. Hey! The word never finished. One of the shadows closed the distance in 2 steps. A precise strike to the throat. Another to the knee. The guard collapsed instantly. No scream. No gunshot. Just a dull thud against the concrete floor. Rex's heart slammed against his ribs. What the hell? Another of Marcus's men rushed forward. He swung wildly. The second shadow pivoted. A sharp elbow to the jaw. A twist of the wrist. The man dropped like a puppet, with cut strings. Within seconds, half the room was on the ground. Marcus watched everything with calm curiosity. He didn't panic. He observed, calculated, because Marcus understood something Rex didn't. This wasn't a fight. It was a takeover. 15 seconds. Rex finally reacted. He pulled a handgun from the back of his waistband. His hands trembled as he aimed toward the nearest attacker. You move and I'll... A voice spoke behind him. You won't. Rex froze. He hadn't heard anyone approach. Slowly, he turned his head. Jean stood directly behind him. Calm, still, close enough that Rex could smell the faint scent of expensive cologne. The gun suddenly felt useless in Rex's shaking hand. Jean didn't even look at it. He simply stepped past Rex as if the man were furniture. At the same moment, men appeared beside Rex. There was a flash of movement, a twist, a crack of bone. Rex screamed as the gun fell from his hand. Men kicked it across the floor. The entire operation had taken less than 15 seconds. Marcus's men were unconscious on the ground. Rex was kneeling in pain. And Marcus Thorne was standing alone. Jean stopped 10 feet away from him. The 2 men studied each other in silence. The board revealed. Marcus adjusted his glasses. Well, he said calmly, you must be the man from the cafe. Jean said nothing. Marcus continued. I admit I underestimated you. Jean tilted his head slightly. You did not underestimate me. Marcus raised an eyebrow. No. Jean's voice was quiet. You misunderstood the board. Marcus smiled faintly. Explain. Jean gestured toward David. You put a civilian in play. One of Jean's men stepped forward and cut the ropes binding David to the chair. David stumbled to his feet. His eyes were wide with shock. Another operative gently guided him toward a side exit. Go, the man whispered. David hesitated. Who are you people? No one you need to worry about. The door opened quietly. David disappeared into the night. Jean didn't even glance back. His attention remained entirely on Marcus. You threatened a child, Jean continued, to settle a score. Marcus leaned against a metal table. You interfered in my territory. Jean shook his head slightly. No, I corrected a mistake. Marcus's smile faded. And what mistake was that? Jean's eyes hardened. You broke a rule. The code. The room felt colder suddenly. Even Rex, still kneeling in pain, sensed something had changed. Marcus folded his arms. And what rule would that be? Jean answered simply. Civilians are not pieces. Marcus laughed quietly. Everyone is a piece. Jean stepped closer. No. His voice dropped. Not in my city. Marcus studied him carefully now. You speak as if you own the place. Jean did not respond immediately. Instead, he looked around the cannery, at the broken windows, at the rusting machinery. at the unconscious men on the floor. Then he looked back at Marcus. I speak as someone who understands consequences. Marcus tapped a finger against the table thoughtfully. And what exactly are you proposing? Jean spoke slowly. You will forget the girl. Marcus said nothing. You will forget her brother. Still silence. You will forget the cafe exists. Marcus's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? For the first time that night, Jean smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a kind of smile predators show when prey finally understands its situation. Then you will learn the difference between a player. Jean stepped closer, and a piece that gets removed from the board. The room went completely silent. Marcus looked around. Jean's men stood quietly at the edges of the room, calm, disciplined, watching. Every one of them looked capable of ending a life without hesitation. Marcus understood power structures, and suddenly the hierarchy was obvious. He was outmatched. Completely. The choice. Marcus removed his glasses, cleaned them slowly with his cloth. A deliberate gesture. Time to think. You're asking me to abandon profitable territory, he said calmly. Jean nodded once. Yes. And if I agree? Jean replied without hesitation. You live. Marcus studied him carefully. Simple as that? Yes. Marcus chuckled softly. You run an interesting operation. Jean did not respond. Marcus placed his glasses back on. Then he sighed. Well, he spread his hands slightly. I suppose retirement has its advantages. Jean nodded. A wise decision. Marcus glanced at Rex. Get up. Rex struggled to his feet. His arm hung at an unnatural angle. Marcus spoke again. We're leaving. None of Jean's men moved. Marcus walked past Jean toward the door. Then he paused. You know, Marcus said quietly, most men would have killed me tonight. Jean replied calmly. That would have been easy. Marcus smirked. And Jean's eyes were ice. I prefer solutions that last longer. Marcus laughed once. Then he walked out of the cannery, his empire collapsing silently behind him. The diner, an hour later. Anika sat inside a quiet all-night diner. A cup of chamomile tea rested between her hands. She hadn't taken a single sip. Her nerves were too raw. The door chimed softly. Jean entered. He looked exactly the same as before. Simple dark suit, calm posture, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. He slid into the booth across from her. Your brother is safe. Anika exhaled shakily. He called. Jean nodded. He's already on a bus back to campus. Tears filled her eyes. Thank you. Jean shook his head. This was not about gratitude. Then what was it about? He answered simply. Balance. Anika looked at him. You scared me. I know. You talk like this is normal. For me, it is. She studied his face. You could have killed them. Yes. But you didn't. Jean leaned back slightly. Killing people is inefficient. Anika blinked. That's your reason? Jean nodded calmly. A dead man creates chaos. A frightened man creates compliance. Anika stared at him. You're terrifying. Jean almost smiled. I've been told that. The question. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Anika asked a question that had been burning in her mind since the cafe. Why? Jean looked up. Why what? Why help me? He considered the question carefully. In my world, he said slowly, people fall into categories. Predators, prey, or pieces. Anika listened quietly. But you, Jean continued, were none of those things. She frowned slightly. What was I then? Jean answered honestly. A variable. She laughed softly. That's not very romantic. I'm not a romantic man. Another pause passed. Then Jean leaned forward slightly. The truth is simpler. What truth? I saw someone trying to break you. And I disliked disorder. Anika studied him carefully. You're a strange man. Jean nodded. Yes, I know. An offer. Jean reached into his jacket pocket. He placed a small business card on the table. You work 3 jobs. She blinked. How do you know that? I ask questions. She looked at the card. There was no company name, just a number. What is this? A solution. That's what you said about the napkin. And it worked. She hesitated. What kind of solution? Jean answered calmly. The kind that removes unnecessary suffering. Anika looked into his eyes. You're offering to help me. Yes. Why? Jean spoke quietly. Because survival shouldn't be the only thing you get from life. Her throat tightened. I can't owe you something like that. Jean shook his head. You won't. How can you promise that? Because it will be your choice. He stood. If you want help, call. He turned to leave, then paused. And Anika. Yes. For the record, his voice softened slightly. You are stronger than you think. And then he walked out of the diner, leaving her alone with a cup of tea, and a future that suddenly felt much larger than the life she had been surviving. 3 months later, the city looked exactly the same. Traffic still crawled through downtown every morning. Office workers still rushed through crosswalks with coffee cups in hand. The harbor cranes still stretched over the water like steel skeletons against the sky. From the outside, nothing had changed. But for Anika Rao, everything had, because survival was no longer the only thing her life was about. The end of the grind. The last night she worked at the daily grind felt strangely quiet. Not because the cafe was empty. In fact, it was packed. Students crowded the corner tables with laptops and textbooks. 2 construction workers argued about football near the window. A young couple sat close together sharing a slice of cheesecake. The espresso machine hissed constantly. Orders were shouted. Plates clinked. The place buzzed with life. But inside Anika's chest, there was a calm she hadn't felt in years. Because this was a final shift. She wiped down a table slowly. Her crimson apron still smelled faintly of coffee and lemon polish. For 3 years, this place had been her battlefield. Every shift had been another step in the long climb out of grief and responsibility. Her manager, Mr. Henderson, approached nervously. You sure about this? He asked. Anika smiled gently. Yes. You're one of the best servers I've ever had. Thank you. You could become floor supervisor here. She shook her head. I don't want to survive anymore. Mr. Henderson blinked. What? Anika untied the apron. I want to build something. She folded the fabric carefully, then placed it on the counter, and walked out. The opportunity. 2 weeks after the diner conversation, Anika had called the number on the card. Jean answered immediately. I was wondering when you would call. Her voice had been cautious. I'm not asking for charity. I know. I'm asking for an opportunity. Jean paused, then said simply, Good. The next few weeks changed everything. Jean did not give her money directly. Instead, he gave her structure, contacts, information, a business consultant who helped her write a plan, a lawyer who helped navigate permits, an accountant who showed her how to structure a loan. Everything was arranged carefully, and when the numbers were finished, Jean made a single investment, not a gift, a no-interest loan, with one condition. You repay it when your business is stable, he told her. And if it fails? Jean shrugged. Then we learn. Anika stared at him across the table. You're trusting me with a lot. Jean replied calmly. I'm trusting your character. The Haven. 6 months later, the doors opened. The sign above the entrance read, The Haven. It wasn't just a coffee shop. It was something different. The space was warm and open, with large windows that let sunlight flood across wooden tables. Shelves of books lined the walls. Students studied in quiet corners. Local artists hung paintings along the hallway. The smell of fresh bread mixed with roasted coffee beans. For the first time in years, Anika felt something powerful. Ownership. She wasn't serving someone else's dream anymore. She was building her own. The team. David worked the counter on weekends. His engineering program was going well. Better than well. His tuition was fully paid. Not by Jean. By Anika. Her business was already profitable. Watching her brother laugh behind the counter filled her with quiet pride. Lena, her roommate, managed the book section. Her sarcastic humor brought constant energy to the shop. You realize, Lena said one afternoon while stacking novels. This place makes the daily grind look like a prison cafeteria. Anika laughed. That bad. That depressing. Lena leaned closer. And your mysterious billionaire friend? Anika rolled her eyes. He's not a billionaire. Sure he's not. The ghost of the old world. Marcus Thorne disappeared from the city. One day his dock operations were running normally. The next day they were gone. Abandoned warehouses. Closed accounts. Empty offices. Rumors spread quickly. Some said he retired overseas. Others said he was hiding from someone far more powerful. No one knew the truth. But one thing was clear. Marcus Thorne never returned. A familiar visitor. One crisp autumn afternoon, the bell above the Haven's door chimed. Anika looked up from the schedule. She was writing. Gene stood in the doorway, but he looked different. No suit, just a gray sweater and dark jeans. For the first time, he looked almost ordinary. Anika smiled. I was wondering when you'd visit. Gene stepped inside. I was told the coffee here is the best in the city. Lena whispered loudly from behind the counter. That's the mysterious guy. Anika shot her a warning look. Gene glanced around the shop. Students studying. Neighbors chatting. Warm light. Peace. You built this, he said quietly. Anika nodded. With help. Gene shook his head. No, you built it. The coffee. She poured him a cup of dark roast. The same kind he always ordered. Then she slid across the counter. On the house. Gene reached for his wallet. Anika stopped him. This isn't about a debt. Gene paused, then smiled faintly. Your choice. She nodded. My choice. He lifted the cup and took a sip. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence felt comfortable. The truth. Finally, Gene said quietly, You're different. Anika raised an eyebrow. Different how? When I met you, you were surviving. And now you're leading. She laughed softly. That sounds dramatic. Gene looked around the Haven. Does it? Students studied peacefully. Neighbors talked. Music played softly. Anika followed his gaze. I guess not. The question that matters. Gene set the cup down. There is something I want to ask you. Anika leaned against the counter. What is it? Gene hesitated. A rare moment of uncertainty. In my world, he said slowly, people usually fear me. She shrugged. That seems reasonable. Gene almost smiled. But you don't. Anika thought about it. You saved my brother. That wasn't the question. She studied him carefully. No, she said finally. I don't fear you. Gene seemed genuinely curious. Why not? Anika answered simply. Because the first thing you did when you had power over someone was stop them from hurting someone weaker. Gene looked down at the coffee cup, then back at her. That doesn't make me a good man. No, she said softly, but it makes you a man with rules. The future. Outside, the afternoon sun dipped lower in the sky. Inside the Haven, the warm lights began to glow. David laughed with a customer. Lena argued with a delivery driver about book prices. The shop was alive. Gene stood up. I should go. Anika tilted her head. You always leave too quickly. Gene shrugged. Old habits. He turned toward the door. But before he could leave, she spoke. Gene. He stopped. Yes. Next time you come. She gestured around the cafe. You're not just a customer. He looked back at her. What am I then? Anika smiled. A friend. For the first time since she had met him, Gene looked genuinely surprised. Then he nodded once. I would like that. The life she chose. After he left, Anika stood behind the counter for a moment, watching the cafe. The Haven. Her brother's future. Her community. Her life. For years she had believed strength meant endurance. Holding on. Surviving the storm. But Gene had shown her something else. Real strength wasn't just about surviving. It was about building. About choosing what kind of world you wanted to exist in, and then creating it, brick by brick, choice by choice. The bell above the door chimed again as another customer walked in. Anika smiled. Welcome to the Haven. For the first time in a very long time. She wasn't holding on anymore. She was moving forward. And this time, she was the one writing the story.